What is good, Foundation Nation? Robbie C here, and today we are going to learn how to throw a sidearm. Let's get into it. Yeah, that would probably work a lot better if I had a cameraman. Hey, Lindsay, can you help me for a second? And today we're going to learn how to throw a forehand. Let's get into it.
It's all or nothing.
All right, y'all, we are out here, and if you have been around disc golf for any period of time or even watched videos on this channel, you have seen players like Brody and Hunter and even Silas throw some incredible forehand shots. And you may have been thinking to yourself, well, I'd like to throw some good forehands, but how do I do it? We're gonna take just a few minutes today to go over the basics of forehands so that you can get out there on the course and start crushing some forehand shots today. Now, before we can start throwing epic forehand shots, we first have to pick up the disc. Let's take a second to talk about grip. There are three common grips that you're probably going to see while you're out there on the course. The first is the stack grip. The stack grip comes from your fingers being placed side by side. The middle finger is going to nestle on in there between the rim and the flight plate of the disc, and the pointer finger serves to add stability and strength to that middle finger, which is going to be the primary place that we put power and spin into the disc. Speaking of power, that takes us to our second grip, the power grip. In a power grip, you're bringing that pointer finger down to create a second point of contact on the rim of the disc, which allows you to inject even more power. As you come through with this grip, you're going to be pushing the disc forward, letting it snap and rotate off of those fingers. While this grip can add significant power to your shot, it also makes it a little harder to control your angles. Another perk of this grip is that during rain or wet conditions, it allows that second point of contact, which gives you just a tad bit more touch on the disc so that it doesn't slip out of your hand. And speaking of control, that takes us to our third and final grip, the fan grip. In the fan grip, the pointer finger is going to slide out to the middle of the disc, which gives you a lot of control and locking in those angles while you're trying to throw the disc. But it does sacrifice a bit of power because you don't have that added stability that the stack grip gives us or that second point of contact that the power grip gives us. If you're throwing touch-up shots, the fan grip is a powerful tool that many players lean on. Now, that's a lot of conversation about the bottom of the disc. Let's take a quick moment to talk about what your thumb's doing up top. Traditionally on forehand, you're going to have your finger closer to the rim of the disc or the edge of the disc. The reason being, you're trying to create a sort of pinch between that middle finger and your thumb. I'm not trying to say that they need to be on top of one another, but there's going to be some necessary tension. But don't worry, we'll talk about the importance of that tension in just a moment. The last thing we're going to talk about with grip is wrist position. In a backhand throw, your wrist is going to be somewhat static, whereas in a forehand throw, the wrist becomes very active. This active wrist is going to generate a lot of our power, especially when we first start learning to throw forehands. So think of it like a slingshot. Instead of being forward like so, I'm going to take the disc and actively push it backwards so that my wrist has to engage in the throw. So you've got the grip, you've got your wrist locked and loaded, and you may be saying, Robbie, what do I need next? Is it an incredible disc to throw, like Raptorius? No, I don't know why you would think that. Obviously, you're gonna need a chair. And the more comfortable the chair is, the better. Oh yeah, forehands. We need to understand where the power comes from in a forehand. Remember that tension that we were talking about earlier? This is where that's going to come into play. The more that a disc is spinning, the smoother the flight is and the further it goes. A reason that a lot of people can learn to throw farther with forehands early is that it's much easier to impart spin on the disc with a forehand than it is with a backhand. By pulling the disc back and snapping forward, the tension that we have between our thumb and our middle finger is going to allow the disc to rotate off of said middle finger. But why do I have you sitting in a chair? And that's because if I don't start you in this beautiful Adirondack chair, you're gonna have the temptation to power the disc with your arm and possibly your leg. And while that's definitely necessary for future throws and powerful throws, it comes after we've graduated from the basic concepts. I think I could be so bold as to claim that 50% of the people who play disc golf can't throw a forehand beyond 200 feet. And yet, just sitting in a chair knowing that power comes from the flick of the wrist and imparting spin onto the disc off of that middle finger, I can pretty casually take a forehand from this chair. I think I'm gonna need more space. Hold on. There we go. That is a lot better. Now, the point of the chair exercise isn't to be throwing 600-foot forehands immediately. We're simply trying to isolate the wrist. Now, some of you are going to spend a decent amount of time in this chair really trying to feel out that flick of the wrist. And others, well, you're going to graduate from the chair pretty fast. For this next step, you're going to grab some discs.
But what kind of discs? Are we grabbing overstable discs, understable discs? What are the magical discs we're throwing?
All right, I guess we should address what type of disc you should be throwing for all of this. Now, commonly when people choose a forehand disc, they like to lean on somewhat overstable options such as the Pig, the Zone, the Felon, the Justice, the Raptor. There's honestly a ton of options. And people like these discs for two options. One, they're incredibly reliable. They are going to ride a hyzer a majority of the way. And a hyzer is the most reliable shot in the game, but we're going to talk about that in just a brief second. And the second is that overstable discs are generally extremely torque resistant. The more torque resistant the disc is, the more it's going to follow that intended path. But honestly, these overstable discs can actually hide some of the errors that we have in our forehand, and they can inhibit us from developing solid forehand technique. Because an overstable disc wants to come out of our hand and get to the ground as fast as possible, in order to get it to fly farther, we often have to crank it on some anhyzer or come with a baseball chop through the disc. This chop enables us to get more distance on the disc while inputting more power into the disc, but I want to hit you with an honest truth about forehands. If you start learning forehands by throwing understable discs, you will easily be able to learn how to throw overstable discs. But the opposite is definitely not true. Therefore, learning your forehand with understable discs allows you to learn how to throw a forehand with every disc in the game much faster than if you start on the overstable stuff. And for that reason, some of my favorite discs to teach people how to throw forehands with are Polecats and Novas. Now, there are tons of neutral to understable options out there when it comes to throwing putters, and you can find lots of those at foundationdiscs.com. So you've graduated from the chair, you've got your understable discs in hand. What else are we doing to master this forehand? And the easy answer is hyzers. The hyzer is the most reliable shot in the game because you're setting the disc on a path that wants to go only in one direction, meaning that the only real variable that we have to control is distance. So what I want you to do is take your elbow and I want you to touch it to your hip, and I want it to stay right there. I want you to then take the disc and sort of bend it down, and we're going to keep the wrist pop motion going for us as we throw the disc out on extreme hyzers. And remember, we're still just trying to use the wrist to spin the disc. That's why we're still somewhat isolating the arm, but we're getting a little more graduated to a full throw. Now, one of the reasons I love doing this on a painted line on a soccer field or even a football field is that it gives me an aiming point and a reference tool that I can use for progress. Over time, as I become more comfortable, I'm going to let my elbow come off of my hip, and I'm going to start firing those discs a little more flat. Rather than the extreme low to high motion, I'm going to start bringing my arm across more evenly. But the things that I'm looking for are to ensure that the disc is still coming out smooth and that it's not rolling over to the left. Which takes us to our last part of today's video, and that is rolling the wrist. One of the biggest pieces of advice that you'll hear regarding forehands is to keep your palm facing up to the sky. And yet, if you look at pros throwing their form, most of them do not finish with this pose. And that is because they understand the concept that every good forehand deserves a reward. When we throw a forehand shot, our wrist should be pointed towards the sky, but only for enough time for the disc to leave our hand and us no longer have an impact on how the disc is flying. If I've done that, my palm is pointed towards the sky and wide open for me to receive the reward of throwing a very good shot. Where people get in trouble is they think about actively turning their wrist over, but it's a subconscious movement. If you're finding that your forehand shots are burning over to the left for right-handed players or to the right for left-handed players, that likely means you're doing one of three things. The first is that you're starting higher than your finishing point, pulling the disc on a downward trajectory. The second is that you're actively rolling your wrist too soon after the disc is released. A common thing that helped me was thinking about releasing the disc forward rather than releasing the disc hard. And then the third, and an important caveat that we need to remember, is that some discs are very understable, which makes them very hard to throw for the average player. I'm not out here telling you you can't throw overstable options, because lots of players do, including myself. But if you find yourself unable to forehand understable options, it's probably because you got so used to the active correction that those discs give you that it might be time to readdress your forehand. I just want to make sure that we're setting clear expectations here. This video is not designed to help you start throwing 420-foot forehands tomorrow, but the road to throwing an amazing forehand certainly does begin with the basics. My goal is to see as many people fall in love with this sport as possible, and we all know that things are more fun when you're playing better. So my hope is that you can apply these principles to your game, and your card mates will have to channel their inner Connor and give you a couple heck yeahs while you're out there.
Heck yeah, Trevor.
We want this to be a resource for all players, so let us know in the comments below what's the best tip you've ever received about forehands. As always, we want to say thanks for watching. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.